California Air Resources Board's Heavy Duty Vehicle Inspection and Maintenance Program, and that's being referred to as the Clean Truck Check Program. So my name is Cyril Jose. I'll be a presenter today. But before we get into the regulation, just some quick background. So we are York Engineering, founded by Judy York in 1996. We assist clients with a variety of environmental regulations. So we have expertise in air quality, hazardous waste, stormwater, safety, industrial hygiene, et cetera, at the local, state, and federal levels. We've worked with a couple thousand customers, and we've completed more than 10,000 projects in California alone. And just a bit more focused on just CARB mobile source experience. So we've assisted over 100 clients with CARB's mobile and portable source regulations, like the off-road diesel regulation, on-road heavy duty, so that's truck and bus, large spark ignition, LSI, etc. We're gearing up to help a lot of our clients with the advanced clean fleets regulation, and we have a separate webinar on that, so hopefully you guys catch that webinar as well. Our mobile source experience spans across pretty much every industry, including public agencies, local water districts, manufacturing facilities, etc. You can see, we have offices all over California. Most of our work is focused in California, but we do support clients in other states as well. And then a bit more about myself. Again, I'm Cyril Jose. I've worked with mobile source clients for several years now at York. I've been involved with all sorts of fleets, with forklifts, on-road vehicles, off-road equipment, portable equipment. And these fleets have come in all sizes, from fleets of just a handful of trucks to fleets with thousands of vehicles and equipment. So I've come across a good number of interesting mobile source compliance situations and helped clients navigate through all of that. Jeremy introduced himself earlier, and he's going to come back on right now to just give a few tips on how to use GoToWebinar.
Again, thanks for joining us, everybody. We do have everybody muted, so if you do have a question at any time, go ahead and feel free to use the GoToWebinar form. You can pop it out with the orange arrow that hides up in the upper right-hand corner of your screen usually, and just go ahead and feel free to ask a question. We can try to save a little bit of time at the end of our webinars for a little Q&A. If we don't get to your question, we'll definitely follow up with an email. One question we get in all of our webinars, can I get a copy of the slide deck? And that is yes. Emily will be sending it. She told me she's going to send them later today or early tomorrow morning to everybody who attended today. There's no polls on this question, but I do want to mention something. You may notice that there's a little bit of sound going up and down on Cyril's microphone, so I'm working on that. But if it becomes too much of a problem, just shoot me a message and I will make some more drastic measures here. But it's been working so far, so hopefully it won't be too bad for you. Anyways, thanks again for joining us, and hope you enjoy.
Great. All right. Thanks, Jeremy. So just some quick overview of what we're going to cover today. So we'll start off with some background and motivation for the Clean Truck Check program, which I'm going to be abbreviating as CTC throughout the presentation, just on the screen. Then we'll compare some big picture ideas from the Clean Truck Check with another regulation which has similar requirements, the Periodic Smoke Inspection Program, or PSIP. Then we'll go into the details of the Clean Truck Check program itself, and we'll kind of wrap it up with some tips on how to prepare for upcoming requirements. So to talk about motivation, what inspires CARB to come up with this regulation, and what gives them the authority to pass these regulations, right? So first off, there are federal standards for air quality that are set by the United States EPA. And California's branch of the EPA is responsible for implementing those standards throughout the state. So the California Air Resources Board, CARB, is a department of Cal EPA, and their goal is to develop regulations and programs to reduce air emissions. So CARB has authority to impose regulations that meet or exceed EPA standards. So if you look at this pie chart here, you can see that NOx emissions, these are NOx emission contributions from different sources throughout the state. And you can see that the majority of NOx emissions are from mobile sources. So 80% are in total come from off-road mobile, heavy-duty vehicles, medium-duty vehicles, and light-duty vehicles. And this chart, by the way, is taken from CARB's mobile source strategy document, which is published on CARB's website. And some of you may have seen this breakdown before, especially if you've attended some of our other mobile source webinars. But you can see how mobile sources make up such a large portion of air emissions. And we're focused on that 26% slice there today, which is attributed to the heavy-duty vehicles. And that's what this regulation aims to reduce emissions from. So according to CARB, a majority of those heavy-duty vehicle emissions, that 26% slice, are from just a small percent of vehicles with malfunctioning engines or malfunctioning emission control systems, or vehicles with tampered equipment, or some sort of improper vehicle maintenance. So CARB is interested in reducing the number of vehicles with these malfunctions or maintenance issues. And their hope is that by doing that, they'll also reduce emissions from those vehicles. So this table shows CARB's estimate of NOx emissions reductions from different on-road vehicle regulations that they have in the works. So you can see advanced clean fleets, advanced clean trucks, the zero emission drayage, etc. But the heavy duty inspection and maintenance, right, the Clean Truck Check program, they have some pretty high hopes. Just in 2023, just from planning for requirements in the future, they're hoping to see 3.5 tons per day reduction in just the South Coast Air Basin. In San Joaquin Valley, 11 tons per day by the end of next year, and 18 tons per day total in the South Coast by the end of 2031. So those are some pretty large emission reductions that they're anticipating from this program being in effect. Similarly, these are CARB's estimates for reductions in particulate matter emissions from different on-road vehicle regulations. So you can see again, they're anticipating from 0.5 ton per day statewide by the end of next year, all the way to 0.8 tons per day, nearly a ton per day statewide by the end of 2030. So, and you can see among all of their regulations, a majority of these emission reductions they're anticipating actually from this Clean Truck Check program. So, this kind of leads into the purpose of this program. The most obvious one, of course, is emission reduction, like we just talked about. So they want to reduce NOx and PM emissions from on-road heavy-duty vehicles. But some additional purposes is CARB wants to track heavy-duty vehicles and their compliance status. So this program will hopefully help them to track whether or not vehicles are in compliance with not only this regulation, but other on-road vehicle regulations. And CARB wants to tie that compliance status to DMV registration renewals. So CARB wants to find a way, or CARB is essentially going to prevent DMV registration renewals if they know that a vehicle is not in compliance. And then, of course, they want to create an online web tool that establishes a joint reporting database between the DMV and CARB. And this online web tool kind of goes hand in hand with CARB's, CARB wanting to track compliance. By using this database, they're hoping to identify the vehicles with the compliance issues and then follow up with enforcement action. So now that we understand a bit more about CARB's motivation and purpose for this program, we can kind of move on to talking about some of the similarities and differences to the PSIP. which is also a smoke inspection and maintenance program, and it's been in effect for a while now. And the PSIP, similar to the Clean Truck Check program, aimed to control excessive emissions from heavy-duty diesel vehicles. And it did this by requiring an annual smoke test and an inspection of emission control equipment. But the thing is, these tests and inspections were not submitted to CARB, and so compliance was really difficult for CARB to enforce. It was just something that diesel enforcement staff requested occasionally when investigating other violations. So enter the Clean Truck Check program, which is going to supersede the PSIP. Now that these test and inspection results, they're going to be tied to DMV renewal. You're going to be reporting them to CARB. And there's going to be an annual compliance fee of $30 per vehicle also. That's going to be issued. And it's phasing out the PSIP. A bit more of a direct comparison here. So if you look at the applicability for the PSIP versus the Clean Truck Check, you can see that the PSIP applied to only diesel vehicles with a gross vehicle weight rating greater than 6,000 pounds that were both registered and operated in California. But there were no reporting requirements, there was no fees, and there was just an annual smoke test for engines that were more than 3 years old. The Clean Truck Check program pulls in also natural gas vehicles, basically any non-gasoline vehicle. But the gross vehicle weight rating is now 14,000 pounds. So between 6,000 to 14,000 pounds, there's a bit of a gap. And I'll go over that in a bit. As long as the vehicle is operated in California, it is subject to the program. So it can be registered with any state DMV. So that was a loophole that they kind of closed. As long as the vehicle is entering California and operating in California, it can be subject to this program. There's now reporting and, of course, a $30 vehicle fee. Interestingly, this program also includes personal vehicles. So, motorhomes, or if you have a personal vehicle that's greater than 14,000 pounds, that's diesel, that would be included in this program. The PSIP also actually excluded one vehicle fleets, but there's no such exclusion in the Clean Truck Check program. And basically, in this program, you have smoke tests if the engine is older than 2013 model year, and newer engines need to use a CARB certified reporting device. And I'll cover those requirements in greater detail in the upcoming slides. And some exemptions. So if a vehicle is operating according to an executive order or an emergency declaration by the governor, then it would be exempt from this program for the duration of the operation if it's operating according to that emergency declaration. So as long as copies of dispatch records or other supporting documentation that proves the vehicle was used to support emergency operations, if those documents are maintained, then that vehicle would be exempt during that time. Also, similar to other on-road vehicle regulations, they have a 5-day pass, which is basically something you have to get approved before operating in California. And it can only be requested once per year. So, if a vehicle is coming out of state, it's only going to operate in California within 5 consecutive business days. Once per year, that owner can obtain a 5-day pass before operating in California. And that pass just needs to be kept in the vehicle while it's in operation in California. There's a few other exemptions too for zero emission vehicles and authorized emergency vehicles, and also for vehicles that operate only on private roads. So going back to that applicability, so you can see that gap there. The PSIP applied to vehicles, the gross vehicle greater than 6,000 pounds, and Clean Truck Check applies to greater than 14,000 pounds. So CARB has basically published that they will be sunsetting the PSIP after the Clean Truck Check program requirements take full effect at the start of next year. But they haven't indicated what happens to vehicles in that gap area, right? 6,000 to 14,000 pounds. They haven't released whether or not there could be a separate regulation. I've contacted CARB staff a couple times, and they're not quite sure yet either, but we'll keep you guys up to date if anything changes. I think there were some talks of having those vehicles kind of get looped into the smog check program, which is kind of what gasoline vehicles, passenger vehicles already go through. So these might get kind of roped into that as well. But just be on the lookout for that. For now, Clean Truck Check program only applies to gross vehicle greater than 14,000 pounds. All right. So going into sort of the meat and potatoes of the requirements here. So most of the requirements in the regulation are split up by two vehicle categories. So the first category, onboard diagnostic equipped vehicle, OBD equipped vehicle, that's just a heavy duty vehicle equipped with an OBD system that has a model year 2013 or newer diesel engine or diesel hybrid engine, or model year 2018 or newer alternative fuel engine. And the reason they make that distinction, right, is because trucks older than 2013 had OBDs. I'll go into a bit more detail about OBDs in later slides, but starting in 2013, the OBDs that were required in each heavy-duty truck had additional functionality, and that's why it's defined this way. And then a non-OBD equipped vehicle is pretty straightforward. It's any vehicle that doesn't meet the definition of OBD equipped vehicle. A few more definitions here. So compliance year, that is defined as the start and end date that corresponds with each vehicle's DMV registration expiration date or renewal due date. So it's specific to each vehicle, which means each vehicle in a fleet has different compliance years, which means different compliance deadlines for each vehicle. And then, so an annual compliance deadline it's just the final day of a vehicle's compliance year. So if you have a requirement with an annual compliance deadline, then that requirement just needs to be done once per year before the vehicle's annual DMV registration date. Kind of in the similar vein here, semi-annual compliance date is, it occurs on month 6 and month 12 of a vehicle's compliance year, so just twice a year. And as an example of a vehicle's DMV registration expires on January 10th, then the semi-annual deadlines would be July 10th and then January 10th of the following year. And quarterly compliance deadline follows the same logic. So occurs in months 3, 6, 9, and 12. So same example, if you have a renewal due date, DMV renewal due date of January 10th, then that vehicle will have a quarterly deadline that falls on April 10th, July 10th, October 10th, and January 10th of the following year. So it's going to be very important for everyone to know the semi-annual compliance deadlines for each vehicle, because every vehicle that's subject to this regulation will have a semi-annual deadline. And then later on, starting in 2027 onwards, which I'll cover later, OBD equipped vehicles will have quarterly deadlines. So make sure to figure out the semi-annual compliance deadlines for each of your vehicles. So some of the impacts of these deadlines, CARB allows that any required testing and inspection can be done and submitted up to 90 days before a deadline. So for a quarterly deadline, for example, that's pretty much the entire quarter. So you'll need to keep good track of when the test is done and what deadline that satisfies. Also, CARB has written into the regulation that they can take up to 72 hours to deem that a vehicle is compliant. So depending on when you're planning to do the testing and inspections to comply with the deadline, if it's within that 72-hour period, there's a chance that your DMV renewal will not go through, or the databases won't be updated fast enough for you to make your payment on time and things like that. So just keep that in mind so that you perform the testing and inspections and submittals well in advance, ideally before that 72-hour period. All right, so moving on to some of the testing requirements, I'll start off with the non-OBD equipped vehicles and their requirements, because this is the most similar to the PSIP. So for calendar year 2023, it's actually just ongoing compliance with the PSIP, which is annual smoke tests. If you haven't done them already, annual smoke tests just need to be completed by the end of this year. Starting in 2024 onwards, that's going to become a semi-annual requirement, so twice a year. Same thing, smoke test using procedure SAE J1667, so that's the same procedure that was used for the PSIP. There's also going to be an added semi-annual emission control equipment inspection, which is basically just a checklist. I'll go over that in the next slide. And these tests and inspections need to be submitted in an online web tool. That web tool hasn't been published yet, but once it is, that's where all the testing and inspection would need to be submitted. And also, these tests and inspections need to be performed by a Clean Truck Check certified tester. And that has different requirements. It's a different program, training module, and test that needs to be taken, different from the PSIP. So if you have personnel already trained to do the tests for PSIP, they will have to be retrained separately for the Clean Truck Check certified tester credential. So going into that checklist, so non-OBD equipped vehicles, emission control inspection, pretty straightforward. It basically is just opening up the vehicle, looking at the engine, making sure that the emission control label is present and legible, making sure any emission control equipment is in the proper configuration and hasn't been tampered with, everything's been properly installed, that kind of stuff. The only thing that will need to be also reported and recorded is the vehicle's mileage and any malfunction indicator lights that come up on the dashboard. Those would also have to be reported. But it's a pretty straightforward checklist, and as I already mentioned, needs to be performed by a Clean Truck Check certified tester. So now I'll move on to OBD equipped vehicles and their requirements, but just as an overview, what is an OBD? So onboard diagnostics, they are electronics that are incorporated into a vehicle's systems, and it's designed to capture operational data and basically give you alerts about those data points. So early OBDs just had the malfunction indicator lights, right? The lights on your dashboard, which we've all seen on our passenger cars, right? Like check engine lights, or the check tire pressure light, which is perpetually on my car, for example. But for heavy duty trucks, the OBD systems are a little bit more complex, and they can capture other issues, like if there's any issues with emission control equipment, or if the diesel particulate filter has any issues, if there's issues with the catalyst, is the engine running rich or lean, it can capture all of that data. And all that data can be kind of exported. So that little 9-pronged thing on the left there, that's where you can connect to the vehicle and export that data using some sort of linking cable. And there is software that you can download on your computer, for example, where you can connect your computer to your truck and get all this operational data, and you can download it and figure out what you want to do with it. So that is what an OBD is. And because there's this capability where you can download all this data, CARB has a different set of requirements for OBD-equipped vehicles. So in 2023, this it's the same as for non-OBD equipped vehicles, just compliance with the PSIP, which is just the annual smoke test. But starting in 2024, it'll be a semi-annual requirement, but the testing has to be done using a CARB certified OBD testing equipment, which is kind of similar to that data download software, but it has to be CARB certified, and it needs to have the ability to export that data to CARB without anyone tampering with the data. And starting in 2027 onwards, that becomes a quarterly requirement. Same thing, you have to use a CARB certified OBD testing device. And very important, you cannot use a smoke test for compliance for OBD equipped vehicles starting in 2024. So your only option for compliance is the OBD testing devices. So there are two options that are provided in the regulation. One, continuously connected remote onboard diagnostic device. So quite a mouthful, CCROBD. This is going to be a CARB certified device that's hardwired into a vehicle. So it's basically permanently installed, and it would continuously and automatically collect data from the vehicle, and it would export that data to CARB. So one of the nice things about this would be that no human interaction would be needed. You just install it and you're kind of just good to go. You set different parameters and it'll automatically do the testing for you, the data export for you. Some downsides, of course, because it's permanently installed to one vehicle, you would need one per vehicle. And also there's currently no CCROBDs available on the market. There's a few companies that are still planning to develop some, but at the moment there are none available. Testing option number 2 is a non-continuously connected remote OBD device, NCCROBD, and that's also a CARB certified device. And this one would kind of act like a scanner, and it would take a snapshot of the vehicle's compliance status. So this is very similar to the software that you can already download. And basically what it'll do is you have the software installed on your computer, you connect the vehicle to your computer, and it'll take that snapshot, but you won't get to edit the data or anything like that. It'll automatically take the data and export it and send it to CARB. On that picture there, that's a picture of the interface for the certified manufacturer for one of these devices. There's only one so far, and that's RA Automotive's Software Solution Inc. Silver Snap tool. So that's sort of the interface. There's probably going to be more to come. Different companies are still developing the software, making sure it meets CARB standards. But yeah, this is testing option number 2. Regardless of which option, well, actually for NCCROBDs, because there is human interaction involved, if you're using that, a Clean Truck Check certified tester must be the one to operate that device. And basically, a certified tester needs to complete a CARB training course. They need to pass an accreditation test. And this credential will be required for performing testing using the NCCROBD, or if you have non-OBD vehicles, the smoke opacity tests and the emission control inspection forms need to be completed and uploaded by a credentialed tester. And this credential needs to be, you need to be recertified every 2 years as well. A little bit more about the online web tool. So like I mentioned, it hasn't been released yet. Initially, they were anticipating release in July, but they have now changed that to say latter half of 2023. CARB has basically just said, regardless of when it's released, they'll give a heads up to everyone that they know will be subject to this regulation, and hopefully that heads up will be enough time to make sure all the requirements are met. So CARB is hoping to pre-populate this online tool with data from their existing databases like DMV and CARB, like truckers and diesel enforcement and things like that. But ultimately, it's up to the owner of the fleet to make sure that that data is correct and edit it and make sure that the fleet that's represented in there is accurate. If new vehicles need to be added, those need to be added within 30 days, or if a vehicle has been removed from the fleet, also within 30 days, things like that. And in the web tool, you can also identify which vehicles are operated by subcontractors. And the web tool is where you upload all your testing and inspection results, and also where you pay your annual compliance fee, $30 per vehicle. So what about vehicles that aren't operated by the owner or the owner's employees? So a freight facility, that's just defined as a seaport or an intermodal rail yard facility anywhere within California. And as long as heavy-duty vehicles operate within the facility boundary, facility property, each calendar year, that freight facility will need to retain a document that attests only clean truck check compliant vehicles enter and operate within their facilities. So this applies to any heavy-duty vehicle that enters that facility. You need to basically have proof that that facility, that heavy-duty vehicle entering the facility is compliant. Similarly, for freight contractors, which is just anyone that enters into a contract with a party that requires operation of a vehicle in California, they also have a similar requirement, which is they can only contract compliant fleets and vehicles, and they need to maintain records that demonstrate that compliance. So for example, one is an affirmation of fleet-wide compliance, which is basically going to be a sort of certificate from the dispatching fleet that needs to be obtained by the freight contractor before finalizing a contract. And that affirmation just basically says, yeah, this entire fleet is fully compliant and can be operated within California. And that needs to be renewed every 12 months. So it needs to be dated within 12 months of any vehicles dispatched in California. Also, records of any transactions and agreements with the shippers and brokers that documents that a particular vehicle is being operated in California needs to be maintained. Each vehicle's clean truck check compliance certificate, which is in the fleet, which can be downloaded in the fleet's online web tool when it comes online, that will also need to be provided to the freight contractor and must be maintained as documents by the freight contractor. For brokers, or kind of the middlemen, they need to also retain this information, but only about the dispatching party. So only the fleets that are being contracted. All right. Lots of requirements. What are the enforcement actions that CARB will be utilizing? There's two different avenues. There's going to be CARB's referee inspections, which are going to be initiated electronically. And then there's going to be CARB's field inspections, which are going to be initiated in person, right? Like a roadside inspection. So a referee is just any individual or company authorized by CARB to independently evaluate vehicles that have some sort of compliance issue, or if there's some sort of issue with the with completing the testing according to the requirements of the regulation. So CARB can require a referee inspection if the data that you submit to CARB is not consistent with other similar make and model vehicles. So CARB will review the data and they'll say, hey, this vehicle should have this type of data, but instead this looks a little weird. We're going to send someone out to perform a referee inspection. If the vehicle itself is for some reason designed in a way that the testing and inspection can't be performed according to the regulation, same thing, they'll have a trained referee basically come by and verify compliance, and they're trained to do the testing and inspection based on whatever condition of the vehicle. If CARB suspects that the emission control equipment has been tampered with, or if a law enforcement agency has some other concerns or suspicions about a particular vehicle, they can also require a referee inspection. And then field inspections, they're a bit more random, and that's just an inspector or any sort of peace officer, so highway patrol, police officers, office of the state fire marshal, etc. They can select a vehicle randomly for a field inspection while on the road. For these field inspections, drivers of the vehicle, they need to know what to do when they're selected. So some of the directions that they need to follow, standard ones like giving the license and registration, but the driver may need to drive the vehicle to a different testing area, allow the inspector to perform any tests and inspections, which could involve opening up the driver's side of the vehicle, that door, to access maybe the door jamb or the data connector for the OBD, or press on the accelerator while in neutral, different things like that. And also sign any citations or inspection reports that the inspector has for them to sign. Okay, so that kind of covers the requirements and the enforcement actions that are kind of prescribed in the regulation. So how can we prepare for all of these requirements? So planning. So 2023 will be a great year for planning. There's several steps that can be taken. First off, you need to determine which of the vehicles in your fleet would be considered OBD equipped versus non-OBD equipped vehicles, since the requirements kind of branch off depending on which category the vehicle falls under. You'll need to start tracking due dates. So, create some sort of compliance deadline tracking system for each vehicle and determine the semi-annual deadlines for each vehicle, definitely up front. Later on, for OBD equipped vehicles, you'll need to also determine the quarterly deadlines, but from 2024 to 2026, all vehicles will have a semi-annual compliance deadline at least. Make sure that you complete your smoke test in 2023 for all vehicles greater than 6,000 pounds gross vehicle. And then starting in 2024, of course, the clean truck check will be in effect. But for 2023, make sure all of your trucks have completed that annual smoke test and you have that record available. Have, and develop a plan for testing. So if you're planning on doing your testing and inspections in-house, then make sure that your personnel have the clean truck checks certified tester credential. And for OBD vehicles, either you'll need to plan to purchase a CARB approved tool, either the CC-ROBD, which is going to be installed in each one of those vehicles, or the NCC-ROBD, which is going to be that scanning tool. Or there's also options popping up where people are purchasing the NCC ROBDs and setting up shop so that you can kind of do a drive-through type situation, kind of like if you were to get a smog check, you know, just drive up to this to a facility and they will have all the software and equipment and they'll do the testing and submit the test results and inspection results on your behalf. So whatever plan you choose, you know, make sure you have a plan in place. Later this year, you'll need to create your online WebTool account. So whenever the WebTool is released, owners need to go in there, create their accounts, make sure the fleet information is accurate, update that information if needed, and the first annual compliance fee per vehicle is due by the end of this year or within 90 days of whenever the web tool is released, if it happens to not be released in 2023. So keep all of those things in mind as well. You can assign a designee. So a fleet designee is basically anyone who has authorization to go in. So it doesn't need to be the owner who goes in and makes these updates. You can designate someone to go in and maintain the fleet information and make updates, things like that. For 2024 and onward, make sure that your drivers are informed of the potential for a field inspection and make sure that they know what to expect during a field inspection. And of course, complete the semi-annual testing and reporting required, switching to quarterly for OBD-equipped vehicles, and make sure if you're doing testing in-house that the Clean Truck Check certified testers have their credentials renewed every 2 years. Well, that about wraps it up for this webinar. York is here to help. So I see there's a few questions here, so I'll get to those questions right now. Let's see. So if the vehicle is not registered or registered as non-op and does not operate in public roads, only on private property. So if the vehicle only operates on private property, never operates on public roads, then it would not be subject to this regulation. Let's see. $30 to register per vehicle for everyone, including school districts and city entities, yes. So public agencies are also subject to this rule. So it's $30 per vehicle for everyone, yes. Next question. When would one test a vehicle with an exempt plate? What would be the date or month to do so? Okay, so that is a very good question, and I didn't cover that. If you have a vehicle that's registered out of state, or if you have an exempt plate, then it's based on your VIN. So the last digit of your VIN determines which month that you test in. So from 0 to 9, and they have the numbers associated with that. Let's see, who asked that question? So Aaron, I can send you an email with some more details on that. Let's see, next question. Will CARB be sending out a schedule or notice for when we need to get inspected? So if it's a referee inspection, then yes, they will send a notice. There's also a separate thing where CARB can determine if a vehicle they feel is a high emitting vehicle or they have some other issues. They'll send out a notice saying you need to get your vehicle tested. Those are the only times they'll actually give you a reminder of when to complete an inspection. Otherwise, it's up to you to basically track the requirements based on the DMV renewal dates. Let's see, could one test the vehicle more than required, meaning every 45 days? Yes. I don't think there's anything preventing you from testing more than required. But I think in terms of uploading the results, you should basically, it would probably be best to upload results only once per compliance period. But yeah, there's nothing preventing you from testing more than required. Where can I get more information on the web tool? So right now there isn't much information available on the web tool, unfortunately. Very little is known about it at the moment. So, we're kind of staying tuned, and as soon as we get that information, we'll hopefully kind of disseminate that to our clients and everyone else who's interested. But yeah, at the moment, not very little is known about CARB's planned web tool. It's not been launched yet, and yeah, like I said, their goal is to launch it by latter half of 2023, so sometime within the next 6 or 7 months. What would be sufficient for facilities to confirm the trucks are compliant? So the onus is on that dispatching company to provide that attestation. So if you're contracting a company with a vehicle fleet that's going to be operating on your property, then that fleet owner needs to provide the documentation. Here are the vehicles that could potentially enter your property. Here's all their compliance certificates showing that they're compliant. And here's an attestation. We're basically certifying, and we're putting our necks on the line and saying every vehicle that'll enter your facility will be compliant. So that's sort of on them. And then you just kind of maintain those records, and then you can kind of just point to those records and say, hey, as far as we knew, the fleet that we contracted is compliant based on these documents. So as long as you maintain these documents, that would be sufficient to confirm the trucks that are entering your facility are compliant. Does the definition of freight contractor, and considering requirements for contractor compliance, apply to any and all heavy-duty vehicles hired, even if they have no relevance to moving freight? Yes. So any heavy-duty vehicles that enter your facility. So if you were to hire an on-road sweeper truck, would we be considered a freight contractor in that situation per the regulation? So that's a good question, because if you're a freight facility and you're asking if you have a contract to have an on-road vehicle enter your facility. Let me look into that into a little bit more detail. I'll note down that question, Christopher, and I'll get back to you if you can provide your email. Or I think I can get your email from Jeremy, and I can do a little bit more research and get back to you on that. How long do you think it would take if one did not register in the new system? Would there be fines? Yes. So CARB is implying that they are going to be ramping up inspections, ramping up enforcement. So the immediate consequence is that DMV renewals won't be processed unless your vehicle is compliant. So the DMV will now have access to this database, and they'll see that these vehicles haven't been registered or haven't been reported in this web tool. No testing and inspection reports have been uploaded, and they'll just refuse to basically renew your DMV registration. And then if that vehicle is being operated without a registration, of course, and it gets pulled over, there could be consequences, etc. And CARB can also separately follow up and issue fines for non-compliance as well. Please send the last digit VIN info to everyone for exempt plates. Yes, that sounds good. So I'll just send that out as a blanket email to everyone that attended the webinar. Our fleet is exempt, so can you also email me regarding when to test and pay Mesa Water? Oh, sure. Sounds good, Carrie. We'll do that. What is the current cost of the OBD testing equipment? So that's a good question as well. So the one certified testing equipment on the market right now, that NCC ROVD Silver Snap tool, the pricing ranges depending on what you get, but there's an upfront cost. I think it's in the couple $1,000 range, maybe like between $3,000 and $5,000 upfront. And then there's a subscription fee associated with basically maintaining the exporting requirements and other requirements, making sure that those requirements are met in whatever iteration of software they're providing you with. But I don't have all the details on that, but that's what I know so far. So a couple $1,000s up front, and then a subscription cost of, I think, a couple $100s, either annually or at whatever frequency that the vendor prescribes. If we take our trucks to a testing site, will the testing site send the information to CARB and DMV, or will the owner have to send the information in themselves? That's a good question. So when you take it to a testing site, the testing site will do it. Excuse me. So since only certified testers can upload these results, the testing site has those certified testers, and they have all the equipment, and they will upload and send the information to CARB. So the testing equipment doesn't have to be linked to a specific vehicle, especially if it's that NCCRBD. For the CCRBD, since it's specifically installed in each vehicle, of course, that it's linked to a vehicle. But for the NCCRBD, as long as you have that technician, you can use that one portable scanning software for hundreds of, how many ever trucks you want, right? So if you just take your truck into one of these testing locations, they'll just have that ready to go. They'll plug in, they'll run the software, it'll export data, it'll gather the data, export it, and part of that export is information on the vehicle itself. So yeah, it doesn't have to be submitted by the owner. It'll automatically get submitted by the certified tester at the testing location. Okay, and last question here. When do we have to start to submit HV truck smog check or OBD testings? I'm not sure I fully understand that question. When do we have to start to submit HV trucks smog check or OBD testings? Sorry, Edgardo, I'm not 100% sure what you mean, but the testing requirements for the clean truck check start in 2024. So it'll depend on the DMV renewal date for a vehicle. So you take the month and day, and in 2024, that'll be sort of your first deadline. And that your next deadline is the 6 months after that, basically. Will CARB be sending a list of testing facilities out? CARB has a database of approved testers, but not testing facilities. So that list basically shows who has that credential and their email address and their company, but it doesn't specify a location per se. So you could potentially reach out to someone using the email that's listed there, or look up the company information and see if they offer testing locations near you. But CARB won't be compiling a list of testing locations, or at least they haven't done so yet. Heavy vehicle. Okay, so when do you have to start? So okay, so in that case, it sounds like I kind of answered your question then, Edgardo. So yeah, it depends on your on the DMV renewal date for each vehicle. So it's different for each vehicle in your fleet. So it looks like I've gone through all the questions. Are there any other questions at this time?
Anything else, Cyril? Emily should be sending out a copy of the slide deck here either tonight or tomorrow, she told me.
Okay.
And then I'm sure I send a message to her to send all these questions to you so you can follow up on the ones you wanted to follow up on.
Okay, great. Yeah, and then my email is on the screen and will be also on the slide deck, so please feel free to email me with any questions, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Hope you have a good day.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.